in the dendrites, the Niesel bodies, telodendria, the axon hillock. The membrane of the axon is the axolemma. The fibrous membrane is endoneurium. The membrane of the Schwann cell is a neurolemma. And then, of course, the ever popular nude of Ranvier. We will have two stations with the spinal cord model. So in viewing the layers of the meninges, we would first note in yellow the epidural space, then the dura mater. We would say next would be the subarachnoid space, and then the pia mater. Looking at the cross-section of the cord, we would note, because this is posterior, posterior column, lateral column, anterior column, posterior median fissure, anterior median sulcus, and then the gray matter, posterior horn, lateral horn, anterior horn, and then the gray commissure with the central canal. Incoming pathways. So we would note for incoming,
I tried.
the dorsal ramus, the spinal nerve where they both combine, and then the dorsal root ganglion, and then the dorsal root leading into the posterior horn. For outgoing, we would have the ventral root leading to, again, the spinal nerve, and then branching would become the ventral ramus. But for visceral motor, sympathetic nervous system, we enter the white rami communicans and enter the sympathetic chain ganglion. So for the brain, on the surface, noting convolutions versus folia, lateral sulcus versus the central sulcus, or fissure of Rolando, the transverse fissure, frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe. From an inferior view, we would be noting olfactory bulb, olfactory tract, the midbrain, as well as the pituitary, the pons and the medulla. This brain, because it holds together, is better suited for showing the longitudinal fissure, the optic nerve, and the optic chiasma, because there's no pituitary in the way. We'd have the midbrain, pons, and medulla, and the gray connecting between the two hemispheres of the cerebellum is the vermis over there. And remember, the folds are known as folia. For this presentation, we would note the insula, the internal capsule, the caudate nucleus. We could also note the lateral mass of the thalamus. And this is our choroid plexus, right over there. On the sagittal section, we would note the cingulate gyrus of the limbic system, the corpus callosum, the fornix, fornix and the brain as well, the lateral ventricle. We would then note the pineal in pink, the intermediate mass of the thalamus, and thalamus is more than enough. To the anterior, it's the hypothalamus with the stalk and the pituitary. More towards the posterior, we have the third ventricle draining into the cerebral aqueduct, leading to the fourth ventricle, to the posterior cerebral corpora quadrigemina, to the anterior the cerebral peduncle, and then, of course, the arbor vitae, pons, and medulla. And for the ventricle system, we have the lateral ventricle, the central third ventricle, the cerebral aqueduct, and then the fourth ventricle. Voila.